Have you ever seen what happens when arrogance blinds a man in uniform? One inspector thought he could push around an ordinary woman, mock her, threaten her, even try to humiliate her in front of everyone. But what he didn't know was the storm hidden behind her silence. Because that woman wasn't just anyone. She was the IPS Madam herself. What happened next shook the entire police station and turned the inspector's life upside down forever. So don't skip. Watch the video till the very end and subscribe to our channel for more powerful and thrilling stories. The beating heart of Shivpur was none other than Rana Chowk. Dust, diesel smoke and endless honking kept the crossroads alive from dawn to midnight. Trucks carrying wheat, vegetables and cement thundered through, while auto rickshaws zigzagged between them like restless insects. People often said if Rana Chowk stopped for a single day, half of Shivpur would starve. But Rana Chowk had a darker name whispered behind clenched jaws: extortion. Policemen who were supposed to control traffic stood there like toll collectors of a hidden empire. Each trucker knew the routine. A constable would tap the bonnet with his lathi, and the driver, without a word, slid a folded note through the window. No arguments, no questions. It was called Chai Pani, sometimes even Sharmaji Ka Hafta, after Inspector Sharma, the station in charge whose belly was as large as his greed. Every day, thousands of rupees disappeared into uniform pockets, climbing up the invisible chain of command, from constables to inspectors, all the way to higher officers. Ordinary citizens watched silently, shopkeepers sipping tea, vendors selling bananas, even schoolchildren walking home. Everyone had seen it. But fear kept their lips sealed. A young driver who once dared to protest had his truck papers torn, was jailed overnight and slapped with a fake theft case. That single lesson spread faster than wildfire, silencing the rest. Justice in Shivpur was not a joke. It was a circus where the ringmasters were the very people sworn to uphold the law. Then one morning, a dark green jeep rolled into Shivpur police headquarters. From it stepped IPS officer Ananya Deshmukh, a woman with sharp eyes, straight shoulders, and no hint of a smile. She was not unknown. Her record included crushing a liquor mafia in Nashik and jailing the son of a powerful minister in Nagpur. She was feared by criminals and quietly admired by the honest. For a week, Ananya did nothing but observe. She drove her jeep across the city, especially around Rana Chowk, watching how money changed hands. From a roadside stall, she noted which constables stood at which corners, who pocketed what and how the chain of extortion flowed. It was an open book of corruption. But she knew evidence, not suspicion, was the weapon she needed. Late nights in her office, Ananya stared at files and scribbled plans. If she struck too soon, the officers would erase all proof. If she hesitated, her transfer would be arranged by the same politicians feeding on this racket. She wrestled with the dilemma, until one dawn she folded away her starched uniform and pulled out a plain cotton salwar kameez. A scarf covered half her face. In her cloth bag lay a handful of vegetables, hiding a small mobile phone, its camera already recording. That day she was no longer IPS Ananya. She was an ordinary woman walking home from the bazaar. As she passed Rana Chowk, the constable on duty, a bulky man named Ramprakash Yadav collected notes from trembling drivers. Autos slipped 20 rupee bills, trucks handed hundreds. Ananya lingered at a tea stall, sipping slowly, her hidden camera capturing it all. But perhaps her eyes were too sharp, her posture too steady. Ramprakash's suspicion grew. "Are, madam." "Idhar aao," he barked, her heart hammered but her face stayed meek. "Ji sahib," she whispered, pretending fear. A constable snatched at her bag. Vegetables spilled onto the road, and with them the glowing mobile phone. The constables froze for a heartbeat, then one smashed the phone under his boot. Another grabbed her arm roughly. The scarf slipped, and silence thundered across the chowk. They were holding not a timid housewife, but the district's highest police officer. Faces drained of color, hands trembled. Ramprakash stammered, "Madam." "Galti ho gayi." But Ananya's eyes burned like steel. She pressed the button of a tiny walkie-talkie sewn inside her kurta. "Alpha team surround Rana Chowk. Immediate action." Within minutes, jeeps screeched in. Commandos in black stormed the area. Constables were disarmed, their pockets turned out, and 17 officers, along with 2 middlemen, were handcuffed on the spot. For the first time, the people of Shivpur saw policemen arresting their own. The crowd that had always looked down in fear now lifted its gaze, a spark of hope flickering in their eyes. That evening, the news spread like fire. That it wasn't just arrests, it was the first crack in a wall of silence built over decades, and at the center of it stood IPS Ananya Deshmukh, the woman who had dared to walk into the lion's den as prey, only to return as hunter. The victory at Rana Chowk ignited Shivpur like a match to dry straw. For a few raw, shining days, the city pulsed with a sense of possibility. People spoke louder on street corners. Vegetable vendors dared to flick their eyes at policemen, and children ran home with news clutched like prized currency. But power that loses money does not surrender quietly. It claws back. Ananya Deshmukh woke the morning after the arrests to a voicemail filled with syrupy false concern from a local MLA named Ramakant Tiwari. He spoke soft and careful, offering cooperation and support while a dozen eyes behind him watched. The tone was a threat dressed as charm. She ignored it. Everywhere she turned, the machinery of retaliation creaked into life. Anonymous op-eds, doctored CCTV frames that hinted at tampering, and 2 local tabloids printing lurid allegations about her past transfers and questionable methods. Her name was blackened, using the same crimeless hands that had once stuffed wads of cash into other men's pockets. The smear campaign was effective in the short run. Certain sections of the society that tinged towards sympathy recoiled. The police union's old guard demanded an inquiry into procedural improprieties. Senior officers who had watched the extortion flow for years now whispered in corridors, asking whether Ananya had jumped the chain. The DIG called her in, an exercise in public reprimand, but she stood her ground. "If evidence shows misconduct, I'll answer for it," she said. "But you will not hide systematic theft behind questions of form." Her calm infuriated the corrupt. It unsettled the honest. To fight a hydra, you needed to follow the bloodline of its money. While the city roiled, Ananya assembled a clandestine task force. It was deliberate and surgical, a finite group of men and women who were not famous, not flashy, and largely overlooked by the political machinery. There was Inspector Ankit Rao, her second-in-command, resourceful, dogged, and wounded by the kidnapping he would later survive. There was Meera Iyer, a forensic accountant from the state anti-corruption cell, a woman whose fingers could dance across spreadsheets and coax stories out of columns of numbers. And then there was Rafiq, an evidence clerk with a soft voice and a memory like a ledger. He remembered faces, license plates, vendors, the placement of a tea stall on a particular Tuesday. Together they were a team built to move quietly and strike clean. Meera began with bank trails. The corrupt rarely deposited their spoils in direct names. They routed them, first through petty dealers, then through hawala operators, finally into layered family-owned shell accounts. Meera's eyes lit at the first anomaly, a series of small, perfectly timed deposits into the account of a vegetable wholesaler in a neighboring district, followed by sizable transfers to an LLC that had no real operations, but an impressive list of property purchases. Those properties had been sold to third parties at wildly inflated prices. The pattern repeated, micro-deposits in many names, consolidated through the same shadowy intermediary. Meera found the intermediary by following a single cell phone number, an encrypted line that appeared in receipts and taxi bookings, always associated with cash pickups in discreet hotel lobbies. The number belonged to a soft-spoken man named Feroz Ansari, who ran a courier business on paper and nothing more in reality. When they put a physical tail on Feroz, they watched a steady stream of white brand taxis stop, drivers exchange cloth bundles, and the bundles disappear into suitcases that later arrived at a farmhouse north of the city. The farmhouse belonged to a company listed in registry records as Tiwari Estates Put Limited, the same name, whispered in the dark. Meanwhile, the pressure on Ananya turned from legal to lethal. One night her car was forced off the road by a black SUV. Stones smashed her windshield. A masked gang approached, carrying iron rods. She kept her composure. She had been trained to. And the squad with her maneuvered the vehicle into reverse and escaped into the neon scramble of city markets. She filed the complaint, but the attackers were already ghosts. The message unmistakable: step back, or the price will be blood. The next strike was personal. Inspector Ankit disappeared. It was an afternoon like any other. Ankit had gone alone to meet a witness in a district 3 hours away. The call came at dusk, static and then silence. Then a ransom-style photo of his service pistol on the table sat in Ananya's inbox. Her stomach dropped, then flattened into ice. Whoever had taken Ankit had planned everything. The abduction route, the unguarded stop, the disguise of ordinary vehicles. They wanted to shake her confidence and to sow fear among her team. Ananya did not panic. She poured state intelligence into tracing Ankit's last ping. The mobile's trail went cold in a rural node, an old industrial estate with broken gates and a history of illegal storage. It was the kind of place criminals used for things they wanted kept out of sight. The rescue required more than brute force. It required patience and deception. They staged a fake transaction. Mira set up a phony Hawala transfer that the team knew would be irresistible to the racketeers. They let word leak just enough, through a trusted intermediary, that a large cache of cash would be moved from warehouse A to location B. The abductors took the bait. On the night of the rescue, the sun had long fallen, and the factory's silhouette lay like a sleeping beast. Smoke hung low from chimneys that no longer worked. The team surrounded the building, snipers in position, commandos cloaked in shadow. Ananya led the breach. Inside the factory, the air smelled of oil and rust. Men in balaclavas moved like nightmares. The rescuers advanced through corridors of crates and discarded machinery. Gunfire broke like a storm. Shots peppered the metal walls, and in the chaos Ananya found Ankit, bound and bruised in a back room. He looked up at her with a defiant grin that was part apology. He had underestimated the danger, and part relief. They evacuated him under covering smoke, and the kidnappers who tried to flee were taken into custody. Ankit's rescue was the point at which the battle moved beyond headlines. The captured men were not small-time crooks. They spoke names, crossings, and times, details that stitched the tapestry of the racket together. Under pressure, one of the captains confessed that money from Rana Chowk regularly traveled north, changed hands in the farmhouse, and then moved through a network of shell companies that terminated in accounts linked, in one way or another, to Tiwari's people. With that thread, the task force had the leverage to move deeper. They synchronized raids across 6 locations, safe houses, storage units, and the farmhouse itself, on a single night. The planning was meticulous. Ananya insisted on simultaneous entry to prevent a single node from burning the rest. What the teams found stunned even the skeptics. Locked rooms filled with ledgers, photocopies of truck licenses stamped with dates and amounts, bank deposit slips, and a ledger in a battered notebook that contained names, men who collected weekly, men who signed off with approval, men who passed envelopes up the chain. In the farmhouse basement, Mira uncovered an old laptop whose encrypted ledger, once cracked, revealed transfers across state lines, shell companies investing in urban real estate, hand-coded entries that matched the receipts found in the pockets of the arrested constables. One entry had a shorthand that matched the name of a distant relative of the DIG Ramakant. Tiwari's name kept surfacing like a shadow, tugging at a marionette. He was not the one who waved a baton at a driver. He created the stage where the baton meant profit. The evidence now showed the money stream feeding into property, jewelry, and a portfolio of companies, some legitimate, some facades. It was a paper trail that could choke even the most insulated official. Yet the fight moved into the courts, and the courts are different hunting grounds. Lawyers with polished suits and practiced mouths laid out their strategies. Tiwari's barristers attacked the chain of custody, questioned the digital forensics, and painted the policemen who testified for Ananya as coerced. They used delay as a weapon, piling one procedural motion upon another, hoping to suffocate the case in red tape. For every day the court took, for every adjournment, the powerful hoped public memory would dim and fear would resurface. But something had changed in Shivpur. The public no longer bowed. Weekly vigils outside the courthouse swelled into a movement. Small traders who once gave up packets of rupees for quiet now whispered names into reporters' recorders. Mira's spreadsheets became public infographics. The people, having tasted justice at Rana Chowk, rallied like a second wind. Social media campaigns amplified evidence. Cash for favors lists were posted anonymously. And a young journalist named Rohit Sharma, initially a critic of Ananya, published a 10,000-word exposé after verifying the ledgers. Rohit's piece changed the narrative from rumor to reality. Newspapers that had peddled smears now had to face the ledger, and the ledger did not lie. The trial became an epoch. Witnesses testified, often under police protection, and sometimes in shaking voices that nonetheless cut through the courtroom like a blade. A small-time constable, tears streaking his face, recounted the way he had been told to collect and forward, and how refusal had meant threats to his children's futures. A middleman described payments to a man at an estate party where Tiwari's laugh had towered above the rest. Each testimony created a lattice that made evasion harder. The defense turned dirty. There were offers to witnesses, veiled threats, and once a vulgar attempt to bribe a clerk. But the court, pressured by public eyes and meticulous prosecution, moved forward. Forensics corroborated Mira's accounts. Rafiq testified to the physical receipts he had catalogued. Ankit, still bandaged but standing resolute, recounted the abduction and the names the kidnappers had used. Ananya, for her part, gave testimony that was part legal argument, part moral reckoning. She spoke about the ordinary men in the marketplace, their daily terror and their small resignations, and how the law must be a shield for them, not a till for the privileged. When verdict day arrived, the courthouse brimmed with tens of thousands of people. The judges had spent sleepless weeks with reams of empirical proof laid before them. They spoke with a measured gravity that reflected the weight of change. Guilty on charges of organized extortion, laundering, attempted murder, and conspiracy, the sentence was heavy. The men who had once laughed and waved away the suffering of drivers and vendors were led away in chains. Shivpur erupted in genuine celebration. Simple vendors shared sweets. Strangers hugged. And for a while the air smelled less of diesel and more of new hope. But Ananya did not allow celebrations to blur into complacency. She issued internal reforms, transparent duty rosters, body cams for traffic constables, and a revamped complaint mechanism that allowed anonymous reports to be audited. She promoted officers of integrity and placed anti-corruption auditors at sensitive nodes. Yet she also knew the deeper lesson. Systems rot when money can flow unseen, when fear is currency, and when the watchers are bought. Her battle was not finished. New networks would sprout where old ones had been cut. But the city had changed its story. Ordinary people had tasted the possibility of being heard. And in that taste, salty and heady and intoxicating, was a new kind of courage that even the richest smear could not fully extinguish. At night, on a terrace that overlooked Rana Chuk, Ananya would sometimes stand alone. The intersection below now had less of the old swagger. Trucks passed with less furtive trembling. Drivers haggled openly at tea stalls. Children played in alleys, their shouts a bright counterpoint to the lingering hum of traffic. Ananya allowed herself a private, exhausted smile. The job had cost them blood and worry and sleeplessness. It had also shown how fragile and resilient a city could be. A new chapter had begun in Shivpur, one where the law was again a possibility, not an irony. But the true measure of victory, Ananya knew, would be a city that could resist the temptation of returning to old habits. And for that, she would have to keep watch even when her name no longer made the front pages. The fight, she decided, was not merely to punish the guilty. It was to redesign the space so that corruption found no purchase. The courtroom verdict did not end the storm. It redirected it. Shivpur was celebrating, but beyond the drums and sweets, the system that had been wounded began writhing like a snake cut in half. For every officer in chains, another lurked in shadows. For every politician who was sentenced, allies whispered of revenge in backroom meetings, IPS. Ananya Deshmukh knew it well. The greatest danger arrives not when you strike the first blow, but after you've shown you can wound giants. The backlash within a week of the judgment. The city's billboards were plastered with posters praising justice restored, but counter-whispers began seeping in. Old politicians loyal to Ramakant Tiwari branded Ananya as an overreacher, claiming she had destroyed decades of order in the police ranks. Anonymous letters appeared in government files, accusing her of favoring certain contractors. A journalist paid by unseen hands published a feature suggesting that Ananya herself would one day taste the corruption she pretends to fight. Worse were the silent moves. Files of pending promotions for Ananya's loyal officers mysteriously vanished. Transfers orders appeared overnight for constables who had testified for her. Mira, the forensic accountant, began receiving threatening calls where a child's laughter played in the background before the line cut. Rafiq found his house ransacked one evening, papers strewn and his old mother trembling. These were no longer just attempts to intimidate Ananya. They were attempts to break her team apart, but instead of retreating, Ananya made her team even tighter. She set up an underground operations room in an abandoned municipal library. Dusty shelves turned into map boards, cracked tables stacked with seized ledgers. Here, away from the poisoned corridors of headquarters, the team plotted their next steps. A wider web, the seized diary and laptop had shown only one slice of the empire. But in the weeks that followed, patterns emerged suggesting something darker. The money trail stretched far beyond Shivpur. Mira noticed transfers routed through Jaipur, Nagpur, and even a small town near the Nepal border. Property documents pointed to shell companies in Gujarat and Karnataka. When she cross-checked with Central Intelligence, a chilling reality surfaced. Shivpur was only a node in a multi-state extortion syndicate. Police stations in at least 7 districts were funneling money upward into the same network. Names once thought untouchable appeared in code: senior bureaucrats, 2 sitting MPs, and even a retired judge. It was not just a racket. It was a parallel economy running alongside legitimate governance. Ananya faced a decision heavier than any before. To pull at this thread meant turning Shivpur's fire into a wildfire that could consume the entire state. She knew she would face suspension, transfer, even assassination, but silence would mean surrendering everything her people had risked. Personal costs. The war began claiming personal costs. Ankit, still healing from his abduction, developed a quiet anger. He confessed to Ananya one night in the library, "Madam, I sometimes wonder, why us? Why should my mother cry at night because some man in Delhi wants to fill his pockets?" His voice cracked, but his fists were hard. Ananya placed a hand on his shoulder, replying, "Because someone must stand. And if we fall, others will rise after us." For Ananya herself, loneliness deepened. Her family, long relocated to safety, begged her to resign. Every evening, her house stood surrounded by armed guards, but inside she ate alone, papers scattered across the dining table. She missed the sound of her younger brother's jokes, the comfort of her father's advice. The price of truth was silence in her own home. The turning point one night. Intelligence came from an unexpected source, Rohit Sharma. The young journalist who had once smeared her but later exposed the ledgers appeared in her office trembling. He had recordings, secret conversations with a fixer tied to Tiwari's network. The fixer admitted that the racket was still alive, regrouping under a new financier, and planning to rebuild its grip once public anger cooled. The fixer had spoken of a secret meeting scheduled at an abandoned resort outside the city, where money and new assignments would be divided. Rohit had risked his life to capture the audio, and he begged Ananya to act. This was the opening. Ananya called her team. "If we strike this meeting, we expose the resurrection before it even breathes." Operation Phoenix. They named it Operation Phoenix, the mission to stop the racket from rising again. For 2 weeks, surveillance teams watched the resort, dark villas with broken fountains, a place once built for weddings now used for conspiracy. Black SUVs arrived at night. Men in crisp kurtas carried leather bags inside. On the night of the raid, the moon hid behind clouds as if shielding itself. Ananya led the assault personally. Commandos moved through the broken gates in silence. Then, in a burst of light and gunfire, the hall doors shattered. Inside, half a dozen men froze mid-transaction, suitcases open, bundles of cash like bricks of sin. Among them were names Ananya had never thought would expose themselves so carelessly. A sitting MLA from another district, the son of a wealthy builder, and a senior officer from the state's vigilance department. Chaos erupted. Some tried to run. Some fired pistols. But the commandos overwhelmed them. For the second time in months, Shivpur witnessed history. Powerful men dragged out in handcuffs, their faces pale under the camera lights that journalists had been tipped off to bring. Aftermath Operation Phoenix shattered any illusion that the network was finished with Tiwari's arrest. It revealed that corruption was not a tree with one trunk, but a forest, each root entangled with another. The arrests sent shockwaves across the state capital. Debates erupted in parliament. The opposition seized the chance to demand resignations. The ruling party scrambled to save its image. Ananya was summoned again to higher offices, this time not for reprimand but for testimony. Committees wanted her reports. Central agencies offered assistance, though she knew assistance often meant control. Media hailed her as the Iron Lady of Shivpur, though she detested the spectacle. It made her victories feel like entertainment when they were really scars. But amidst all this, something subtle shifted. The ordinary people of Shivpur, once bowed and beaten, now walked with a bit more straightness in their shoulders. Truckers at Rana Chowk no longer slid notes, but showed receipts. Vegetable sellers no longer whispered in fear, but argued prices with authority. The city had begun to heal, not fully, not permanently, but with visible stitches of courage. Epilogue one evening. Months after the verdict and Operation Phoenix, Ananya stood at the rooftop of police headquarters. Below her, the traffic of Rana Chowk moved like veins of light. No constable tapped on truck bonnets anymore. Cameras watched instead, silent guardians. Ananya knew corruption had not died. It never truly did. It waited always for silence and weakness. But now Shivpur knew what it meant to resist, and that seed of defiance, that fragile glowing ember in ordinary people's hearts, was the greatest victory she had won. As the night breeze touched her face, she whispered to herself, "The war isn't over. It never will be. But at least tonight justice breathes." And with that, Shivpur, once trapped in fear, continued its slow, stubborn march toward a future where truth was no longer a stranger.